On a dusty roadside outside a forgotten southern town, a young black orphan bends over a broken motorcycle, his small hands blackened with grease. The machine, a roaring beast of chrome and steel, towers above him. Its owner, a tattooed biker with a stare that could freeze fire, watches in silence. The boy doesn't flinch. The sound of rattling tools and the hum of distant engines fill the heavy air. Few would have stopped for him. Even fewer would have trusted him. Yet here he is, fixing the bike of a man everyone else fears. What neither of them knows is that this single act of kindness will set off a chain of events so powerful it will shake an entire community and rewrite what brotherhood really means. The boy's name was Elijah. He lived on the edge of a small, crumbling town that most maps had forgotten, in an orphanage held together by faith, rust, and the quiet resilience of children who had already seen too much. The roof leaked when it rained, and the paint on the walls had long surrendered to time. For Elijah, the sound of engines on the nearby highway was the closest thing to music. He would sneak out after chores to watch the bikers thunder past, their leather vests flashing like armor, their freedom roaring in his chest like a dream he couldn't afford to have. When the motorcycle broke down that day, Elijah wasn't supposed to be there. He was returning from the junkyard, a bucket of scavenged bolts and wires in hand, the kind of treasures he used to keep the orphanage's ancient generator alive. He saw the biker stranded by the road, cursing under his breath, frustration rolling off him like heat. Every instinct told Elijah to walk away. Black kids in that part of town didn't wander near men like him, but he couldn't help it. Machines called to him like family. The biker glanced up when Elijah approached, a long, tense stare between worlds. "You lost, kid," the man muttered. Elijah shook his head and pointed to the bike's fuel line, already spotting the problem. The biker hesitated, then stepped aside. Minutes passed, silent but electric, as the boy worked with nothing but makeshift tools. When the engine finally growled back to life, the man's hardened face softened into something unspoken, surprise, maybe respect. Elijah just smiled, wiped his hands, and walked back toward the orphanage, never knowing that this simple repair had just rewired fate itself. In the days that followed, life at the orphanage returned to its quiet rhythm, patching leaks, rationing food, and pretending the world beyond those rusted fences didn't exist. Elijah didn't speak about the biker. No one would have believed him anyway. To the other kids, he was the quiet one, the boy who fixed broken radios and mended shoes with wire and hope. But something inside him had changed. He began to look out toward the road more often, listening for the growl of engines that once scared him but now somehow felt like a promise. A week later, the town woke to the sound of thunder, not from the sky but from the earth. Hundreds of motorcycles rumbled down the highway, chrome glinting beneath the noonday sun. Windows shook. People peered through curtains. Whispers spread faster than the noise itself. "The bikers are coming." Fear rippled through the town, through the orphanage, too. Sister Agnes, who ran the place with nothing but grace and grit, gathered the children inside. "Stay calm," she said, though her voice trembled. In that part of the South, the arrival of hundreds of leather-clad bikers meant only one thing: trouble. But the bikes didn't stop in town. They turned onto the dirt road that led to the orphanage. Dust rose like smoke as one after another parked outside the gate. 600 riders, 600 engines falling silent at once. At the front of the line stood the man Elijah had helped, his face now softened by a quiet smile, his hands holding something unexpected, a box of tools, a rolled blueprint, and a checkbook. Elijah stepped outside, heart pounding. The biker looked at him for a long moment, then nodded toward the orphanage. "You fixed my ride, kid," he said, his voice rough with sincerity. "Figured we'd return the favor." The children, frozen in awe, watched as the strangers in black leather began unloading lumber, paint, and bricks from their trucks. The sound of hammers soon filled the air, the same rhythm Elijah once heard in his dreams, the same rhythm of something being reborn. For 3 days straight, the orphanage became a construction site powered by roaring hearts instead of engines. Bikers who once carried reputations of fear now carried lumber on their shoulders, laughter echoing through the yard. They patched the leaking roof, rebuilt the cracked walls, and rewired the old generator Elijah had kept alive for years. The kids watched in stunned wonder as tattoos and scars turned into symbols of protection, not menace. Even the townspeople, who had first locked their doors, began to drift toward the noise, curiosity softening into disbelief. But not everyone welcomed it. A few locals, bitter and suspicious, gathered at the fence, muttering about those people and that boy. To them, it didn't matter that Elijah had saved a man's life on the road. All they saw was color and class, something that didn't belong. One man shouted for the bikers to leave, calling Elijah names that tore through the moment like shrapnel. For a heartbeat, the air went still. Every hammer stopped mid-swing. The biker Elijah had helped turned slowly toward the fence, eyes cold as steel. He walked over, towering above the man who had spat the words. But instead of shouting back, he said, "You talk about what doesn't belong, but maybe kindness does." Then he turned away, leaving the insult to dissolve into silence. That evening, as the sun dipped low, the orphanage stood transformed, white walls glowing in daylight, new swings hanging from sturdy beams, a garden freshly planted by calloused hands. Elijah stood in the middle of it all, overwhelmed. The biker handed him the same wrench he'd used that day on the roadside. "Keep it," he said. "Every engine needs someone who cares enough to fix it." The crowd cheered. Engines roared again, and the orphanage lights flickered to life, brighter than they had ever been. In that moment, Elijah realized this wasn't just about rebuilding a building. It was about rebuilding belief in people, in unity, in what could happen when judgment takes a back seat to compassion. When the last biker rode away, the orphanage was no longer the forgotten place it had been. The children ran through halls that no longer leaked, slept beneath a roof that didn't groan in the wind, and played in a yard that smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. Word of what had happened spread across the county, whispers at first, then headlines. People struggled to believe it. 600 bikers rebuilding an orphanage for a poor black boy who had once stopped to help a stranger. But for Elijah, none of that mattered. What mattered was the sound the place made now. Laughter instead of dripping water, footsteps instead of silence. Days turned into weeks, and the bikers returned in smaller groups, bringing supplies, food, and the occasional motorcycle part for Elijah to tinker with. He became a symbol of something larger than himself, proof that kindness could cross the lines drawn by fear and ignorance. Even the locals who had doubted came to see what compassion looked like when it wore leather and rode on two wheels. One afternoon, Elijah stood outside, holding the wrench the biker had given him. The tool had become more than metal. It was memory, bridge, and legacy all at once. He looked toward the horizon where the engines had vanished and thought about how a single act of help had rewritten so many lives. The same road that once separated him from the world now felt like an invitation to it. Years later, visitors would still come to that orphanage, now called Angel's Haven, to hear the story of the boy who fixed a bike and the men who rebuilt his home. They'd ask how it all began, expecting something miraculous. And Elijah would only smile and say, "Sometimes the smallest repair can change the biggest hearts." And as the sun rose over the new roof, the world seemed to ask the same quiet question. What could happen if we all stopped long enough to fix what's broken, not just in machines, but in each other?